Welcome back, YouTubers. You've hit Mr. Land's flipped U.S. history class. This is video number 4 from the exploration colonization era. The title of today's investigation is Religion in the 13 Colonies. Very sensitive topic when we start talking about religion, but we're going to explore that here today. So today in the video, we're going to start you off with, kids, got to do the skills, got to do the process skills up here in the brain, in the membrane. So listening, really important. Got to listen well. You got to read well. So if you're seeing things on screen and listening, you got to process that. So pause the video, rewind the video. If you missed an answer, go back so you can hear me teach it to you again. The whole point is here to fill your brain up with information and be like a sponge. Learn, learn, learn. And last but not least, kids in my class, if you're using your Cornell notes, make sure you check those questions and check those numbers, and that way you can follow along well. I know by the end of the video, you're going to be super filled with great information. Awesome. Now, I'm going to start with vocab. Here we go. I'm going to pronounce these for you. Number 1, purify. Number 2, persecution. That's a big one right there, kids. We're going to use that one a lot. Number 3, tolerance. Number 4, intolerance. Number 5, descent. Number 6, banished. Number 7, refuge. Pause the video, get them down. You're back. Mr. Land's ready to go. The big questions here today that we're going to ask about our video is, what religious groups came to the New World and colonized and explored? Do we know what these groups believed? Can we identify those differences? And then in the bigger sense, what are the beginnings of religious freedom in the United States? And how has it spread? How has that religious freedom ideology been spread through America as the beginning of the 13 colonies to now? We can make connections there, kids. So get in your cars. Let's take a little road trip back to the 13 colonies. Since you saw my last video, we're going to add to that video here today. So Mr. Land used the model of layers, like a burger. So those layers are going to be building the 13 colonies. So the 13 colonies are a mix of ingredients that kind of make it the perfect or not perfect place to live for that person, depending on who they were. So I'm going to add to the layers of the video. Now, the last video, we introduced climate, geography, and economy in the 13 colonies. But now I'm going to add religion. Of course, that's the title of the video. I'm going to introduce some people, some very important famous people. And last but not least, we're going to start to touch upon the idea of government, which is going to be my next video. Wink, wink. So you're going to want to watch that one. But let's dive into religion today. New England, Northern Colony, that's where the journey's starting. That's where our story's going to go. I'm going to focus right here, kids. I'm going to focus on the colony, single colony of Massachusetts. From an Algonquin word, Massachusetts. That's where I'm going right there. Now, the story of religion in the New World takes us back to England, which owned the colonies. Now, the story goes that we had 2 ships called the Speedwell and the Mayflower. Ring a bell, Mayflower? Now, the Speedwell, that boat springs a leak, so Speedwell has to turn around and head back to England. So the Pilgrims all load the Mayflower and they take off for the New World. In the fall of 1620, this group called the Pilgrims arrive at a site that they would call Plymouth, named after the city from which they left in England. And this colony is the Massachusetts colony. Notice that 4-letter beginning there, Mass. Church. So that kind of tells us about who they were. Mayflower, filled with pilgrims, kind of reminds me of this here. Cute little buckles and the black shawls and the cute little pointy hats. Now, pilgrims generally get remembered for a couple of things. First, turkey. Turkey and Thanksgiving, right? Hit that turkey. Gobble, gobble. Well, it probably wasn't the turkey you're having today at Thanksgiving. It was probably more like wild fowl or wild pheasant. But there definitely was birds at the first Thanksgiving. And then on another note, the whole idea of Thanksgiving, yeah, that's kind of not true. So ask me about that in class. I don't mean to burst your bubble there, kids. But another thing that pilgrims get remembered for is the dress code that they had, the shawls and the buckles and the black hats and such. Another myth there, kids. They didn't really wear that kind of clothing, actually. They were really colorful. They had the women would wear like their skirt sacks and the beautiful hand woven skirts, and the men wore their farmers jackets and different farmers hats as well. They're real colorful. So they did not look at all the way you remember them. Sorry to break the news to you, all right? Now the Pilgrims are going to kind of bring the idea of religion into the New World for us. So they leave the Church of England, meaning that they were unhappy with England's church. Now, England had a church that everyone had to follow. The Pilgrims did not want to follow it because they didn't believe in it. They certainly disagreed with the king, who was King James. So they basically separate themselves from England and the church, meaning that they want nothing to do with it. They want a brand new church for themselves. Not only that, King James was sending his bishops to kind of harass and persecute. Persecute means to harass. They were persecuting the Pilgrims. They were threatening them at their work, watching and spying on them on the street. They'd even throw them in jail. Some were even met with threats of murder and death. So these Pilgrims, they wanted to be in a place where they could worship and pray as they saw fit. Little side note, they left to Holland first for a few years and then came to the New World. Now, the Pilgrims looking for these freedoms are actually part of a larger group of people. Now, who do I mean? Pilgrims are actually a larger group called the Puritans. Now, I'm going to use this word a lot. Puritans are the group. You see the buckles and the hats and the dark robes? They actually wore those clothings, not the Pilgrims. Now, the Puritans, they land in Massachusetts about 10 years later at about 1630. Now, they too had beliefs that were religious in nature. They disagreed with the Pilgrims in one big way. The Puritans did not want to leave the Church of England. They wanted to worship and pray as they saw fit, but they didn't want to be separated from the church. They wanted to, listen, purify it, get it? Purify. They wanted to cleanse it out. Now, the Pilgrims, they wanted nothing to do with the Church of England anymore, but they both suffered at the hands of the king. They were both harassed and both persecuted, and they both landed in Massachusetts, and they both brought their religious beliefs and planted them into that new world. So here's something peculiar about the two groups. They were a bit intolerant of any other religion. Being intolerant means you don't accept someone else's religious beliefs. Now, they were very strict about how they felt someone could be saved or in other words, go to heaven. And their ideas of salvation and going to heaven were very strict. They did not buy into other beliefs of other religions. This is going to play out in a bad way for them because we're going to follow to the next colony here called the Connecticut Colony, another Native American word. The Connecticut Colony was started by a man named Minister Thomas Hooker. Now, he leaves Massachusetts. He was a Puritan, but the problem was that he didn't agree with all of the Puritan beliefs. So he decides to take his religion, take his followers, travel south, and they go to Connecticut. Now, Mr. Hooker was not happy with Puritan leaders. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much, but here's the biggie. He wanted more religious choices, more religious freedoms. More importantly, he felt that the men that he was administering religion to, that those men should have a say, an opinion, a vote in government. Women, you don't get a vote here in this time. I'm sorry, you're still out. Sorry, women. But men, Mr. Hooker wanted you to have a say in your community. That's a big idea, kids, because that's going to lead us, next video, wink, wink, everybody, to the government idea that we now have in America. So, Mr. Hooker, we thank you for that ideal of religious freedom and government choices. Now, this is not Mr. Hooker. If you look up Google, that is not him. There is something you might find that looks like Mr. Hooker. That's not him either. That's a famous preacher named Jonathan Edwards. You might look up and find a picture of this man. That's not Mr. Hooker either. That's the famous Puritan John Winthrop. That's not him either. Then you might look up and find that there's an actual statue of Mr. Hooker in the city of Hartford, Connecticut. Well, spoiler alert, the artist did not know what he looked like. We don't know what Mr. Hooker looked like, everybody, and we never will. For such a famous man, there is no portrait that exists of him. So any picture you see on the internet is not him. Sorry. So this takes us to my particular favorite little colony because it's so tiny. It's the tiniest state in the United States. It's called Rhode Island. By the way, FYI, not an island. I know, right? Weird. Ask me in class and I'll tell you. So Rhode Island is started by this man here. Great mustache, by the way. Take a look at that hair. Looks like mine. Now, Minister Roger Williams was kicked out. Are you seeing a pattern here, kids? He was kicked out of, where was he kicked out of? Massachusetts. Guess who kicked him out? Guess. Can you take a guess? The Puritans did. So Mr. Roger decides to start his own colony. Now, he disagrees a lot with the Puritans. So those Puritans, they don't agree with him on one big point. He does want more freedoms for his religious followers. But here's the big one. He believes that Native Americans have rights as well. Oh my God, no. The Puritans are totally upset about that. Mr. Williams believes that white men should pay Native Americans for the land that they're taking. Boom. And the Puritan leaders, look at their little faces. They disagree. And Mr. Williams is banished. He's banished, meaning kicked out. Now, Mr. Williams is called a dissenter. Now, this is kind of a new word. A dissenter is someone who disagrees. So Puritans did not tolerate dissenters. That's why Mr. Williams had to go. But lucky for us, he started Rhode Island. Let me introduce you to this lovely lady here. She is Anne Hutchinson. Guess what I'm about to teach you? Can you guess? Yup, she was also a Puritan woman who was kicked out of Massachusetts. A minister woman kicked out. Can you guess why she was kicked out of Massachusetts? If you guess dissenter, you're right. She did not agree with Puritan men. And not only that, girls, she was a woman. And coming, the word of God coming from a woman to an elder man was a no-no in Puritan world. No. So Mr. Roger Williams writes her and says, hey, I'm starting a colony in Rhode Island. Why don't you come on down and we'll do the religion together? So tolerance. They wanted to accept each other and their religious beliefs. She heads down there, boom, Rhode Island becomes a great place for religious freedom. Sad story, she gets killed by Native Americans, though. We'll talk about that one. Now, let's go south here a little bit to Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is a great state. I'm going to focus on a totally new religious group coming right at you right now. Looks like this. You've seen him at the grocery store. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about this man right here. That is Mr. William Penn. Get it? Penn. He establishes the colony of Pennsylvania. He makes it a refuge, a safe home for a religious group called the Quakers, not the Quackers. I get a lot of kids in class that call them the Quackers. No, not the duck, but the Quakers. Now, the Quakers are super uber tolerant of lots of religions. Mr. Penn, his followers leave Massachusetts. See a theme here? And they leave those Puritans and they find Pennsylvania for more religious freedom. Not only that, Mr. Penn was super chill and super tolerant of a lot of religious groups. They wanted the religious groups to come to Pennsylvania, to live together, to pray together. Very diverse, very mixed. Something really famous, though, is that Mr. Penn outlawed slavery. He was very anti-slavery. They did not allow that in their religion, and he wasn't down with it, which back then made him kind of a trailblazer because slavery was about to become everywhere in the 13 colonies. And Mr. Penn, the Quaker, is telling his people, no slaves allowed. That's pretty legit right there. Now, the last colony we're going to look at is this weird one right here. You see that weird shape right there? Kind of funky looking. That's called the Maryland colony. It's in the South. It's in the Southern colonies, right? So I'm going to introduce to you a new religious group started by that awesome mustachioed guy right there. Beautiful pointy beard there. Now, this is Maryland. The Royal British man named Cecil Calvert or Lord Baltimore starts the colony of Maryland. Now, who does he start it for? This new religious group is called a Catholic, the English Catholics. Long story short, England had a couple of religious wars happening during the 17th century, so Catholics weren't really welcome anymore. And Mr. Calvert, Lord Baltimore as I'll call him, he asks the king, King Charles, that's James's son, he says, hey, can I get a territory for Catholics in the New World and I promise I'll make a refuge or a home for them? And Charles says, yeah, absolutely, go ahead, boom. So now Catholics have a place to live and grow in the New World. Now, an easy way to remember a Catholic is that Catholics in their religion pray to the Mother Mary. She is the mother of Jesus. Now, when you look at her first name, what's her name? Mary. Where did Catholics go in the New World? Maryland. Boom. Now, spoiler alert, sorry, Maryland is not named after the Queen Mother. It's actually named after the actual Queen of England, but it still works the same because you'll remember Mary. Mary is the Catholic mom of Jesus, so that's how we can remember that. Lord Baltimore wanted Maryland to become a colony that was so different from Massachusetts, meaning that it could be so tolerant of anyone who wanted to join and live there. Now, unfortunately, long story short, Mr. Baltimore almost didn't get his wish because Catholics were almost kicked out of Maryland, but eventually they were able to bring tolerance to the colony. So that's Catholics in a nutshell there in the New World. So let's review. Can you identify how religion spread from the first English Europeans, from Massachusetts? Can you name the religious groups that I discussed in this video and some of their beliefs? Can you trace their spread through the colonies as they went from Massachusetts in the north down to Pennsylvania in the middle and then down to Maryland in the south? If you can do that and you can evaluate how religions were tolerant and intolerant to each other, you've mastered the content. Kids, you've been awesome. I'm going to check you guys later. Thanks for coming. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.